The steam from the bathroom fogged the mirror above the sink, casting the room in a hazy glow. I stood at the edge of our bed, absently folding one of Ethan's shirts, my mind drifting through the routine of an ordinary Tuesday night. Then, it happened, so fast, so unassuming, that it almost felt like a prank of the universe. His Apple Watch buzzed, lighting up with a message as it rested on the nightstand. "Hey, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Missed you so much today." The words burned into my mind. My breath hitched, my fingers frozen mid-fold. For a moment, I told myself it must be a misunderstanding, a joke, or an oddly affectionate coworker. But deep down, something sharp and cold clawed its way through my chest, whispering otherwise. I moved without thinking, my hands trembling as I reached for the watch. The shower still ran in the background, a steady hum masking the thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I tapped the screen and saw the contact name, Marina. No last name, just Marina. Who was Marina? The shower stopped. Panic surged through me, and I hastily placed the watch back on the nightstand, careful to position it exactly as I'd found it. My movements felt clumsy, my pulse pounding in my throat as I forced myself to continue folding laundry. Ethan emerged moments later, a towel wrapped around his waist, his dark hair dripping onto his shoulders. "Hey, babe," he said casually, leaning down to press a kiss to my temple. His skin was warm, his scent fresh from the shower. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting into knots. "Hi," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands worked mechanically, folding the shirt, though my mind was a whirlwind of questions and suspicion. As he moved about the room, my eyes followed him, searching for any sign, any crack in his demeanor. He hummed softly, pulling on a t-shirt and boxers before settling onto the bed with his phone. I watched his thumb swipe across the screen, his face a picture of calm. Did Marina know he had a wife? 2 kids? That he lived in this house, slept in this bed, shared this life with me? I felt sick. I wanted to scream at him, confront him, demand answers. But instead, I swallowed the rising tide of emotion and slipped into bed beside him, the mattress dipping under our weight. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at me. I nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Long day, huh?" His touch felt like fire against my skin, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned off the lamp on my side of the bed, the darkness cloaking us like a fragile shield. That night, as his breathing evened out and the rhythm of his soft snores filled the room, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. The message replayed. In my mind, the words dripping with an intimacy that wasn't mine. My chest tightened with every breath, a silent scream building inside me. I needed to know more. The next morning, Ethan left for work as usual, kissing me on the cheek before stepping out the door. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I sprang into action. His watch, his phone, his laptop. Every device became a puzzle piece, a breadcrumb leading me deeper into a world I wasn't sure I wanted to discover. And as I unraveled the threads of his deceit, piece by piece, I began to understand the magnitude of what he had hidden. Marina wasn't just a fling. She was someone he loved. And worse, she didn't know about me. But the worst revelation came later, when I uncovered the truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about my husband. Marina had a child who looked strikingly like him. The walls of my world were crumbling, and I stood at the epicenter, caught between the wreckage and the choices I now had to make. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I could trust the man I had built my life with. And as I stared at the photo of the child, his child, on Marina's social media, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for the truth. The next morning came cloaked in a surreal stillness, though my mind buzzed with a storm of thoughts. I waved Ethan off as usual, watching from the window as his car disappeared down the street. Once the sound of his engine faded, I turned toward the quiet house, suddenly foreign in its familiarity. The investigation began in earnest. First, his watch. I powered it on, scrolling through the messages from Marina. Each exchange felt like a dagger, her words brimming with affection, her tone light-hearted and genuine. Last night was perfect. I'm so lucky to have you. Do you think Liam has your dimples? He smiles just like you. Liam, a name for the child I now knew existed, though I'd never met him. My breath caught as I read the messages again. The idea of Ethan holding a child, another child, playing with him, loving him, tore at something deep inside me. I moved on to his laptop, heart pounding as I guessed at passwords until I found the right one. There it was, a folder tucked away, innocuous and unassuming, labeled with the initials MW inside, were photos. Dozens of them. Ethan and Marina at a park, her head resting on his shoulder. Ethan holding a little boy, Liam, laughing. As they tossed a ball. Ethan and Marina at a candlelit dinner, their hands intertwined across the table. The screen blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, grounding myself against the wave of emotions threatening to drown me. How could he? I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, cataloging every detail. Marina was beautiful, with dark curly hair and a smile that seemed to light up every photo. Liam was a mirror image of Ethan, with the same mischievous grin and deep-set eyes. Next, I turned to social media. Marina's accounts were public, her life laid out in curated posts. She seemed blissfully unaware of the truth, her captions filled with love and admiration for a man she clearly adored. My boys mean everything to me. One post read, accompanied by a photo of Liam and Ethan at the zoo. My stomach churned. I dug deeper, finding connections, timelines, and clues that pieced together a story Ethan had kept hidden for years. Marina lived in a neighboring city, just far enough to make his double life plausible. Their relationship seemed to span at least 5 years. Years in which I had been blissfully unaware, raising our 2 children, trusting him without question. My chest ached, not just with betrayal, but with the weight of the lies I now carried. Marina was innocent in this, unaware of the wreckage her love had caused. And Liam. Liam was an innocent child caught in the web of Ethan's deceit. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. Ethan's betrayal had ripple effects that stretched beyond our marriage, touching the lives of people who had no idea of the truth. I was left with a choice. Confront him now, armed with the knowledge I had, or dig deeper, ensuring I had every piece of evidence before I unraveled the lie he had so carefully constructed. For the sake of my children and for myself, I decided to wait. That night, as Ethan walked through the door, I greeted him with a practiced smile. My voice steady despite the storm brewing beneath the surface. We had dinner as a family, our 2 kids chattering about their day, oblivious to the tension I struggled to hide. Ethan was his usual self, laughing and joking, leaning over to kiss my temple as he cleared the table. Every touch, every glance, felt like a lie. But I played my part, biding my time. Over the next few days, I continued to gather evidence, each discovery solidifying the truth of his betrayal. I tracked his movements, noting the times he claimed to work late and cross-referencing them with Marina's social media posts. I kept a journal, documenting every detail, every clue, every inconsistency. And then, one afternoon, I found something that changed everything. A receipt. It was tucked into the pocket of one of his jackets, forgotten and crumpled. The date and time matched. A night he had told me he was working late, but the location was a restaurant 2 cities over. The same city where Marina lived. The receipt wasn't just a smoking gun, it was the final piece of the puzzle. That night, as I lay beside Ethan in the dark, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. The confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and destructive. But before I could confront him, I needed to make one final decision. Would I reach out to Marina? The idea struck me late one night as I scrolled through Marina's social media, her posts painting a picture of a life so idyllic it seemed almost cruel. Her captions were filled with gratitude, her photos brimming with laughter. And then I saw it. A picture of her in a yoga studio, her mat rolled out beside her, the caption reading, "Finding balance, physically and emotionally. So grateful for this little oasis in my week." The studio was tagged. It wasn't far from here. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school and made my way to Namaste Haven, the boutique yoga studio tucked into a row of charming brick storefronts. I told myself it was innocent enough. I was there for a class, after all, but the fluttering in my stomach said otherwise. The studio smelled of eucalyptus and lavender, the air warm and inviting. A receptionist greeted me with a soft smile, handing me a schedule and pointing me toward the changing rooms. I slipped into my yoga attire, my mind racing. Would she be here today? Would she notice me? I settled onto a mat near the back of the room, trying to blend into the serene ambiance. And then, as the instructor welcomed us and began the session, she walked in. Marina. She was even more striking in person. Her dark curls framed her face, her skin glowing with that effortless beauty I'd envied in her photos. She unrolled her mat a few rows ahead of me, completely unaware of my existence. The class began, the movements flowing in a rhythmic sequence. I struggled to focus, my gaze drifting to her now and then, wondering what she might think if she knew the truth. That the woman stretching a few feet away was her lover's wife. After class, I lingered, pretending to adjust my shoes as the other attendees trickled out. Marina stayed behind, chatting warmly with the instructor before heading to the lounge area. This was my moment. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hi," I said, my voice light, almost casual. "Great class, wasn't it?" She looked up, her eyes warm and inviting. "Oh, absolutely. Amanda's classes are the best. First time here?" "Yeah," I admitted, forcing a smile. "I've been meaning to try yoga for a while, and this place seemed perfect." "It is," she said with a grin. "I've been coming here for a couple of years now. It's my little escape." We fell into easy conversation, her openness surprising me. Marina was charming, with an energy that drew people in. We talked about yoga, favorite local spots, and even parenting, though she only mentioned Liam briefly, her smile softening at the mention of his name. "He's the light of my life," she said, her voice tinged with pride. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "That's wonderful. He's lucky to have you." By the time I left the studio, I had her phone number saved in my contacts and an invitation to join her for coffee after the next class. The guilt weighed heavy on me as I drove home. She wasn't the villain in this story. She was as much a victim of Ethan's lies as I was. But I needed her. I needed to understand how deep his deception ran, to see the cracks in the facade he'd built. Over the next few weeks, Marina and I grew closer. We met for yoga twice a week, our conversations spilling over into coffee dates and long walks. She opened up about her life, her dreams, and her love for Ethan, though she never mentioned him by name, always referring to him as my partner. Each revelation was a dagger to my heart, but I kept my composure, listening, asking gentle questions, piecing together the fragments of her story. "He's amazing," she said one day, her eyes lighting up. "So devoted, so good with Liam. I never thought I'd find someone like him." I smiled tightly, the bitterness rising like bile in my throat. "He sounds wonderful." As I left her that day, her words echoed in my mind. So devoted, so good, with Liam. But what about us? What about his other family? The one he had so carefully hidden? The deeper I delved into Marina's world, the more I realized how tightly I was entangling myself in a web of lies. I was no longer just investigating Ethan's betrayal. I was forming a bond with the woman he had betrayed me with, a bond built on deceit. And as Marina grew to trust me, confiding in me with the kind of honesty I hadn't shared with anyone, in years I began to wonder, when the truth finally came out, and it would, who would be left standing? Marina's laughter filled the cozy cafe as she recounted a story about Liam painting her kitchen walls with yogurt one morning. Her easy smile and the sparkle in her eyes made it impossible not to get swept up in her warmth, even as my heart twisted with each new detail she shared about her life. "Kids," I said with a chuckle, stirring my latte. "They have this way of turning every quiet moment into chaos, don't they?" She nodded, her smile softening. "They really do. But it's the kind of chaos I wouldn't trade for anything. Liam's my world." She paused, taking a sip of her tea. "Well, him and, you know." Her hesitation drew me in like a hook, my breath catching as I forced myself to look curious, not prying. "Your partner?" Marina nodded, her expression shifting into something almost dreamy. "Yeah, him." I leaned forward, resting my chin in my hand. "You've never really talked much about him. What's he like?" Her cheeks flushed, and she glanced down at her cup, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, he's incredible. I don't even know where to start." I braced myself. "We met at this little bookstore of all places," she began, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "I was there picking up something for Liam's bedtime stories, and he was just there, browsing the same shelf. We ended up chatting about books, of all things, and it just felt so easy, like we'd known each other forever." I smiled faintly, my chest tightening. "That sounds like a scene out of a movie." "It felt like one," she admitted, her eyes shining. "And then he asked me out for coffee right there in the store. I almost said no. God knows I wasn't looking for anything at the time, but there was something about him, something steady, like he wasn't just there to play games." My nails dug into my palm beneath the table. Steady, not there to play games. If only she knew. "What's he like?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm within me. Marina's face lit up. "Oh, he's so thoughtful, always doing little things to make me smile. Like last week he showed up with my favorite pastries out of the blue. And he's amazing with Liam, so patient, so attentive. He's everything I could have ever hoped for in a partner." The way she spoke of him made my heart ache. She wasn't just in love with Ethan. She idolized him. He wasn't just a part of her life. He was the foundation of it. "Does he travel a lot?" I asked carefully, my tone light. She nodded, her smile faltering slightly. "Yeah, his work keeps him pretty busy. It's hard sometimes, but we make it work. He always makes time for us, no matter how hectic things get." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. This was the narrative Ethan had spun for her, a devoted partner doing his best to balance work and family, when in reality, he was juggling two lives, two families, and a mountain of lies. "Do you ever feel like—" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Like you wish you had more time with him?" Marina laughed softly, though there was a hint of something bittersweet in her tone. "Of course. Who wouldn't? But I know he's doing all this for us. For Liam. I trust him completely." Trust. The word felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. As our conversation continued, I learned more about their relationship, how he had been there for her through Liam's early years, how he had supported her when she went back to school, how he had become her rock. Every story she told painted a picture of a man I barely recognized, a man who existed only in the world he had built with her, and yet, despite everything, I couldn't hate her. She wasn't the enemy in this. She was a victim, just like me, caught in the web of Ethan's deceit. That night, as I lay in bed beside Ethan, his breathing slow and steady, I stared at the ceiling, replaying Marina's words in my mind. What am I doing? The more time I spent with Marina, the harder it became to separate the woman she was from the situation we were trapped in. She wasn't just a name on a message or a face in a photo anymore. She was a real person, with dreams and fears and a love for Ethan that ran just as deep as mine once had. And yet, I couldn't stop. I needed to know more. About her. About him. About the life they had built together, unknowingly at the expense of mine. Marina and I began to orbit one another's lives like two moons unknowingly pulled by the same gravitational force. What had started as casual yoga chats and occasional coffee dates evolved into a budding friendship that surprised even me. She was easy to talk to, with a warmth and sincerity that made people want to confide in her. And confide I did, albeit carefully. I shared stories about my freelance work and life as a mom, crafting a version of myself that felt true but omitted the one fact that would shatter everything between us. One crisp Friday morning, we met for a hike on a nearby trail Marina adored. The woods were alive with autumn colors, the air tinged with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. "This is my reset button," she said, gesturing to the towering trees and the golden canopy above. "Whenever life feels overwhelming, I come here. It's like I can breathe again." I smiled, though her words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. "It's beautiful. I can see why you love it." She grinned and tugged her scarf tighter around her neck. "You've got to let me drag you out here more often. I swear it's good for the soul." As we walked, our conversation meandered from lighthearted banter to deeper topics. Marina opened up about her struggles raising Liam on her own in the beginning, how she had felt isolated and overwhelmed until Ethan came into her life. "I don't think I've ever told anyone this," she said, her voice soft. "But there was a point when I thought I couldn't do it. Being a single mom, I mean. I felt like I was drowning, like I was failing him." Her words tugged at something deep within me. I placed a hand on her arm, a gesture I hoped conveyed the support I couldn't fully express. "You're an amazing mom, Marina. It's obvious how much you love Liam." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you. That means a lot." "And Ethan?" I asked cautiously. "How did he help you through that?" Her face softened, her lips curving into a fond smile. "He just showed up, you know? He didn't try to fix everything or make big promises. He just was there. He'd listen when I needed to vent, show up with groceries when I was too tired to think about dinner, take Liam to the park so I could have a moment to breathe." I nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily in my chest. This version of Ethan, the attentive, supportive partner, was so far removed from the man I had come to distrust. "And now," I asked, "do you still feel like you can lean on him?" Her expression clouded briefly before she shook her head with a smile. "Of course. Things aren't always perfect, but whose are, right? He's busy with work, and I get it. But when he's here, it's like nothing else matters." The ache in my chest deepened, but I forced a smile. "That sounds wonderful." Over the next few weeks, Marina and I became almost inseparable. We texted constantly, shared book recommendations, and even started planning a weekend getaway, a girls' retreat to a wellness spa just an hour away. It was during one of these planning sessions, curled up on her sofa with cups of chamomile tea, that I noticed a framed photo on her bookshelf. Marina and Liam were front and center, their smiles radiant. But it was the figure standing just behind them that made my breath catch. Ethan, he had his arm around Marina, his expression relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. The sight of them together, a picture-perfect family, was like a dagger to my heart. Marina caught me staring and smiled. That was taken last year at Liam's birthday party. Ethan was such a trooper, spent the whole day running around with the kids and didn't complain once. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. It's a great picture. You all look so happy. We were, she said, her smile tinged with nostalgia. It was one of those rare days where everything just clicked, you know? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As I drove home that evening, the image of the photo burned in my mind. Ethan had built 2 lives, 2 families, and somehow managed to keep us both in the dark. And yet, as much as I despised his lies, I couldn't bring myself to hate Marina. She wasn't just some nameless other woman anymore. She was a friend. But with every step deeper into her world, I felt the walls of mine closing in. How much longer could I keep this up before the weight of the truth came crashing down? It was an overcast afternoon, and Marina and I were tucked into the corner of a quiet cafe. Rain drummed softly against the windows, casting a silvery haze over the street outside. Marina stared into her half-empty cup of tea, her fingers tracing aimless patterns along the rim. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, but I just need to say it out loud to someone. I tilted my head, my stomach tightening. What is it? She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging as though under the weight of an invisible burden. It's Ethan. Sometimes I can't shake the feeling that he's hiding something from me. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. I forced my features into a mask of concern, willing myself to stay calm. What makes you say that? Marina glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. Her voice dropped lower. It's little things, mostly. A text he deletes before I can read it. Calls he steps out of the room to take. And then there are the trips. Always work-related, but they seem to be happening more and more. My heart raced, and I fought to keep my expression neutral. Have you asked him about it? She nodded, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. Of course. And he always has an answer. Something perfectly reasonable. And maybe I'm overthinking it, No, he's never given me a real reason not to trust him. But... She hesitated, her voice trembling. There's this voice in my head that won't shut up. What if I'm wrong about him? What if he's not the man I think he is? Her words hit me like a blow, each one carving deeper into my already fragile composure. I wanted to reach across the table, to comfort her, but the irony of the situation left me rooted to my seat. Do you have any proof? I asked carefully, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Marina shook her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. No, and that's the worst part. I feel like I'm going crazy doubting him when he's never outright lied to me. But there's this part of me that just knows something isn't right. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. It's not crazy to feel that way. If something doesn't feel right, it's worth paying attention to. She gave a small, humorless laugh. I wish I had your confidence. I don't even know where to start. I can't exactly hire a private investigator, can I? And the thought of snooping through his things makes me feel sick. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, the very person she suspected her partner was lying about, sitting across from her and advising her on trust. What do you want to do? I asked, my voice soft. Marina sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just need to trust him and stop letting my insecurities get the better of me. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. Do you think I'm overreacting? The weight of her question hung in the air, and for a moment I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. No, I said finally, my voice firm. You're not overreacting, your feelings are valid, and you deserve to feel secure in your relationship, but I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. If you want answers, you might need to look for them, even if it's hard. Marina nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her tea. Maybe you're right. I don't know if I'm ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. As we parted ways that afternoon, her words lingered in my mind. She wasn't ready to face the truth, but the truth was already unraveling, piece by painful piece. Marina's initial reluctance to dig into Ethan's behavior gave way to a quiet determination, one that she shared with me over the next few weeks in fragments of conversation. I listened intently, nodding in all the right places, but inside, my stomach churned with every detail she unearthed. It started small. Marina began paying closer attention to Ethan's habits. She mentioned noticing how he would always keep his phone face down on the table, a habit that hadn't seemed suspicious before but now felt glaring. "Do you think that's normal?" she asked one day during yoga, her voice low as we stretched into downward dog. "I don't know," I replied carefully. "Could just be a habit. But have you tried asking him why he does it?" Marina sighed, exhaling deeply as she shifted into child's pose. "I've thought about it, but I don't want to sound paranoid. What if I'm reading too much into it?" I didn't have an answer. A week later, she called me late at night, her voice thick with a mixture of nerves and excitement. "I found something," she said, her words tumbling over one another. "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "I was folding his laundry today and I noticed his shirt pocket looked bulky. I'm not proud of it, but I checked. And there was a receipt from a restaurant, a fancy one. He told me he had a late meeting that night. But why would he go somewhere like that for work?" My heart thudded in my chest. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Confronting him feels too direct. What if I'm wrong?" "But—" her voice faltered. "I think I need to dig a little deeper," and dig she did. Marina began keeping a mental log of Ethan's movements, noticing patterns she hadn't seen before. The late-night meetings, the business trips that seemed to coincide with Liam's school events, the way his demeanor shifted when his phone buzzed unexpectedly. "It's like he's living a double life," she confided one afternoon over coffee. "He's still the Ethan I know most of the time, but then there are these moments where he's distant, like he's somewhere else entirely." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't wrong. One evening, she decided to follow him. It wasn't planned. She had come home early from work and saw him leaving the house dressed more sharply than usual. Something in her snapped, and she grabbed her keys, trailing him at a safe distance. When she told me about it the next day, her face was pale, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "He went to a hotel," she said, her voice barely audible. I parked across the street and watched him go inside. He was smiling, looking at his phone like he was texting someone. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "Did you go in?" She shook her head. "No, I couldn't. I sat there for over an hour, hoping he'd come out, but he didn't. I finally left. I felt sick." I reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "I'm so sorry, Marina. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "What should I do? I feel like I'm going crazy. I need answers. But I don't know if I can handle the truth." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt the cracks in my carefully constructed facade widening. Marina's determination to uncover Ethan's secrets was relentless, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. A few days later, Marina's suspicions pushed her to take a step she had long avoided, going through Ethan's phone. "I know it's wrong," she told me on the phone that evening, her voice heavy with guilt. "But I couldn't take it anymore. He left it on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and I needed to know." My breath caught in my throat. "What did you find?" Marina's voice broke. "Messages. He's been texting someone named L. The way he talks to her. It's not just a work colleague or a friend. She paused, and I could hear the tears in her voice. They've been meeting up. He calls her things he used to call me. Love. Beautiful. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her discovery press down on me. L. Ethan must have saved my number under a false name, a precaution I hadn't even considered necessary. What did you do? I asked carefully, my heart pounding. I didn't say anything. Not yet, she admitted. I don't even know how to bring it up. If I confront him, he'll just deny it or turn it around on me. I need something more concrete. That was when Marina decided to dig deeper. She began checking his credit card statements, looking for charges that didn't match the life they shared. Fancy dinners, hotel bookings, even an expensive bracelet purchased from a boutique she'd never heard of. Do you think it was for her? She asked me one evening, showing me a photo of the receipt on her phone. The question hit me like a physical blow. I recognized the date. Ethan had given me that bracelet on my birthday. I forced a neutral expression, nodding slowly. It's possible. But Marina wasn't stopping there. She began keeping track of his movements, questioning every inconsistency in his stories. Each new piece of evidence added to her growing pile of doubts, and with every revelation, the weight of my guilt grew heavier. The more Marina shared, the harder it became to face her. Every time she confided in me, I felt like a fraud, complicit in her pain. One evening, after one of our yoga classes, she invited me over for tea. I followed her into her home, the space warm and inviting, filled with photographs of her and Ethan, their smiles frozen in time. I feel like I'm losing my mind, she admitted, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands were wrapped around a steaming mug, her eyes tired and red-rimmed. Every time I look at him, I wonder who he really is, who he's with when he's not with me. I looked down at my own tea, the guilt swirling in my chest like a storm. You're not crazy, Marina, I said softly. You're just trying to protect yourself. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. I'm so glad I have you. I don't know how I'd get through this without your support. Her words pierced me, and for a moment, I wanted to tell her everything, to confess the truth and take responsibility for my role in this mess. But the fear of losing her friendship, of shattering her already fragile trust, kept me silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over. Marina was unraveling, and I was the thread pulling everything apart. The double life I had been living was becoming unbearable. My friendship with Marina had started as a means to understand Ethan's world, but it had grown into something real, something I valued deeply. And yet, every moment we spent together was built on a foundation of lies. I was caught in a web of my own making, and with every passing day, the strands tightened, threatening to suffocate me. The weight of my deception became unbearable in the days that followed. Marina's pain was a constant, searing presence, her every tear, every trembling word a mirror reflecting the damage I had helped cause. I couldn't escape it. It lingered in the quiet moments of my day, in the stillness of my nights. I found myself avoiding my reflection, afraid of what I might see there. When I did catch a glimpse, brushing my teeth, passing a shop window, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked hollow, her eyes shadowed with guilt and shame. The friendship I'd built with Marina had started as a facade, an elaborate guise to protect myself and my secret. But somewhere along the way, it had become real. I cared for her, deeply. She wasn't just the other woman in my story anymore. She was my friend, a kindred spirit, someone I admired. And the knowledge that I was part of her suffering was a torment I could no longer bear. Her trust in me was unwavering, and that only deepened the ache in my chest. Every time she leaned on me, confided in me, sought solace in my words, I felt the fissures in my heart widen. How could I call myself her friend when I was the living embodiment of her betrayal? But confessing the truth meant annihilating her world. It meant dismantling the fragile bond we had built, the one thing in her life that seemed to offer comfort amidst the chaos. And it meant facing her anger, her heartbreak, her hatred, justified emotions that would leave me exposed and alone. I tried to tell myself that staying silent was an act of mercy, that sparing her the truth was the kindest thing I could do. But deep down, I knew it was cowardice. I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting myself, clinging to the illusion of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond my grasp. Each day brought new evidence of her unraveling. She began losing weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her once bright eyes grew dull, her laughter a distant memory. The guilt pressed harder, suffocating me. I started withdrawing, avoiding her calls, skipping yoga, making excuses for why I couldn't meet. But Marina, in her desperation, clung to me even tighter. "Please," she begged one evening after leaving me a string of voicemails, "I need to talk. You're the only person who understands." And so, I found myself at her doorstep once, again, standing in the glow of her porch light with my heart pounding in my chest. The truth was clawing its way out of me, relentless and unstoppable. The confession Marina greeted me with a weary smile, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her face bare and pale. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. We settled into her living room, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the walls. She handed me a mug of chamomile tea, but my hands trembled too much to hold it. She noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "You seem off." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. My throat was dry, my chest tight. How could I even begin to say what needed to be said? "Marina," I started, my voice barely audible. "There's something I need to tell you." Her expression shifted, concern giving way to confusion. "What is it?" I set the mug down, clasping my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. "I haven't been honest with you," I said, my words trembling. There's something you don't know about me. About Ethan." Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, the air catching painfully in my lungs. "Ethan, he's not just your partner. He's my husband." The room fell into a deafening silence, the weight of my confession hanging heavy in the air. Marina stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that can't be true." "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know about you until I saw a message on his watch. And then I met you and—" I trailed off, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Marina's face crumpled, her hands flying to her mouth as a sob escaped her. "You're lying," she choked out. "This has to be some kind of sick joke." "I wish it were," I said, my own voice breaking. "But it's the truth. I've been living this lie for months, and I can't do it anymore." She rose from her seat, pacing the room with frantic energy. All this time you've been—" "What? Spying on me? Laughing at me behind my back?" "No!" I exclaimed, standing as well. "It wasn't like that, I swear. I never meant to deceive you, but then I got to know you and I couldn't—" "Stop!" she screamed, her voice raw with anguish. "Just stop!" I froze, my heart shattering at the sight of her pain. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. "I trusted you," she said, the she said through her tears, her voice laced with betrayal. "You were supposed to be my friend. How could you do this to me?" "I don't have an excuse," I admitted, my voice trembling. "All I can say is that I'm sorry. So sorry." She didn't look at me, her shoulders trembling as she wept. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I knew I had no right. After what felt like an eternity, she finally looked up, her tear-streaked face hardening with resolve. "Get out," she said, her voice cold and final. I hesitated, but the look in her eyes left no room for argument. Nodding, I turned and walked to the door, my heart breaking with every step. As I stepped into the night, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the empty street. I stood there for a moment, the weight of my actions crashing down around me. Marina knew the truth now. But at what cost? Weeks passed in silence, the absence of Marina's presence like a gaping void in my life. I had tried to respect her need for space, though each day felt like a slow unraveling of my already fragile sense of self. I avoided Ethan as much as I could, our exchanges perfunctory and cold. He was oblivious to the tempest swirling beneath the surface, assuming, as always, that his secrets were safely buried. Then, one crisp afternoon, my phone buzzed. Seeing Marina's name flash on the screen sent a jolt through me. "Can we meet?" The words were simple, but their weight was staggering. My fingers trembled as I typed a response. Of course, name the time and place. She chose a quiet cafe near the yoga studio we used to frequent. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, her posture straight, her expression guarded. A cup of tea sat untouched in front of her, steam curling lazily into the air. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I was ready to face her. But then she looked up, her eyes locking with mine, and gestured for me to sit. I approached cautiously, the memory of our last encounter still vivid in my mind. As I took the seat across, from her the silence between us felt heavy like the calm before a storm. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady but devoid of warmth. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you again," I admitted softly, folding my hands in my lap. Her gaze was sharp, unyielding. "Neither was I, but I've had time to think." I nodded, unsure of where this was leading. "I've been doing a lot of digging," she began, her tone resolute. "And I've pieced together enough to know that Ethan's been lying to both of us for years. I don't know what kind of man I thought he was, but he's not it." The pain in her voice was palpable, but there was also a steeliness there that hadn't been before. "I'm not here to forgive you," she continued, her words cutting through me like a blade. "What you did, it broke me. But I've come to realize that the person who deserves my anger most is him. He betrayed both of us, used both of us, and it's time he faces the consequences." I swallowed hard, her determination both inspiring and terrifying. "What do you want to do?" Marina leaned forward, her eyes burning with a mix of hurt and resolve. "I want us to confront him, together." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Together?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said firmly. "He's been hiding in the shadows, playing us against each other, and I'm done letting him have that power. If he's going to face the truth, he's going to face both of us." A mixture of emotions swirled within me. Relief at being included in her plan, fear of what the confrontation would bring, and a deep, abiding shame that this was the path I had led us to. "When?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tomorrow night," she replied. "He's supposed to be at home. We'll show up together and he'll have no choice but to listen." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The thought of standing beside Marina as she dismantled Ethan's carefully constructed web of lies was both daunting and cathartic. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. She nodded, her expression resolute. I've spent too long being afraid, doubting myself. I need to do this. For me. For us. And I need you there. As part of the truth. Her words left no room for argument, and despite my trepidation, I found myself agreeing. Okay, I said quietly. I'll be there. For the first time. Since I'd arrived, Marina's face softened, just slightly. Good, she said, because after tomorrow, there won't be any going back. Preparing for the confrontation. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with scenarios, each one more explosive than the last. I replayed the last few months in my head, cataloging every choice, every lie that had led to this moment. When morning came, I went about my day in a daze, my stomach a constant knot of nerves. Marina texted me the details, a time, an address, a brief message. We've got this. Her confidence was a beacon, a reminder that this confrontation wasn't just about exposing Ethan. It was about reclaiming our power, our agency, from the man who had manipulated us both. As the evening approached, I dressed carefully, opting for something simple and understated. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, taking in the tension in my jaw, the lines of worry etched into my forehead. This was it. There was no turning back now. When I arrived at Marina's house, she was waiting for me at the door. Her outfit mirrored mine, uncomplicated, practical, but her expression was anything but. Her eyes burned with a fierce determination that I couldn't help but admire. Ready? She asked, her voice steady. I nodded, though my hands were clammy, my pulse racing. Together we stepped into the car, driving in silence toward Ethan's house, the place we had both at different points called home. The house was bathed in the soft amber glow of evening, a deceptive warmth that belied the storm about to descend within its walls. I sat in Marina's car, staring at the familiar facade of the life I'd shared with Ethan. My hands gripped, my knees tightly, my heart pounding against my ribs as though trying to escape the inevitability of what was about to happen. "Are you ready?" Marina asked, her voice low and steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the rearview mirror. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was ready or simply too far gone to turn back. "Let's do this." We stepped out together, the cool evening air biting against my skin. Marina's stride was purposeful, her shoulders squared, and I followed, in her wake, steeling myself for the chaos that was about to unfold. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the quiet neighborhood, and for a moment everything felt suspended. Time, sound, even my breath. Then came the muffled shuffle of footsteps from within, and the door creaked open to reveal Ethan. He froze, his face a canvas of confusion, and then a flash of something else. Panic, perhaps, when his gaze shifted from Marina to me. "Marina." My name. What's going on?" His voice wavered, the usually smooth cadence betraying his unease. Marina stepped forward, her chin held high. "We need to talk, Ethan. Inside." Ethan's eyes darted between us, his mind clearly scrambling for an explanation, a strategy. "Now's not really a good time." "Now is the only time," Marina interrupted, her tone razor sharp. Without waiting for an invitation, she brushed past him into the house. I followed, the air inside heavy and suffocating. Ethan shut the door slowly, his movements deliberate, as though trying to buy himself precious seconds. He turned to face us, his features schooled into a mask of feigned calm. "What's this about?" he asked, folding his arms. Marina didn't waste a moment. "It's about the lies, Ethan. The secrets. The double life you've been living." His jaw tightened, a flicker of something. Anger, guilt, fear, crossing his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't!" Marina snapped, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know. I know everything, Ethan. About narrator's name. About your wife." His eyes widened, his composure cracking at the edges. "Marina, listen." "No, you listen," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it feels like? To give your heart to someone only to find out they've been lying to you every step of the way? To think you've found love, only to realize it's built on a foundation of betrayal?" Ethan's gaze flicked to me, his expression pleading. "I can explain," but I found my voice before he could finish. "Explain what, Ethan? That you've been playing both of us for years? That you've lied to Marina, to me, to our children?" My voice broke on the last word, tears stinging my eyes. Marina stepped closer to him, her fury a palpable force. "Did you think you could keep this up forever, that we'd never find out? Or did you just not care about the destruction you'd leave in your wake?" "I do care," Ethan finally burst out, his voice desperate. "I care about both of you. I never wanted to hurt either of you." "Don't you dare," I spat, the anger I'd buried for so long surging to the surface. "Don't you dare try to paint yourself as the victim here. You made choices, Ethan. Choices that hurt everyone. You claim to care about." Marina's voice joined mine, sharp and unyielding. "You didn't care about me, Ethan. If you did, you wouldn't have lied to me every single day of our relationship. You wouldn't have let me dream of a future with you, while you already had one with someone else." Ethan raked a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of our combined accusations. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Marina laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You didn't mean for this to happen? What a convenient excuse. You chose this, Ethan. Every lie, every omission. That was a choice." The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with unspoken words. I looked at Ethan, the man I had once loved, and felt a pang of grief for the life I thought we had. But that grief was tempered by something stronger: clarity. "I want a divorce," I said quietly. The words, like a stone, dropped into the still water of the room. Ethan's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with shock. "Wait!" "No," I said firmly. "There's no waiting, no more excuses. This is over, Ethan. You don't get to keep pretending everything is fine." Marina crossed her arms, her expression hard. "And you don't get to keep me either. Whatever fantasy you had about having it all, it's done." Ethan looked between us, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for a lifeline, but there was none to be found. "We're done here," Marina said, her voice cold. She turned on her heel and walked toward the door, her movements purposeful and resolute. I followed, pausing only to look back at Ethan one last time. His shoulders were slumped, his face a mask of defeat, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: freedom. Marina and I stepped into the night, the cool air wrapping around us like a balm. We didn't speak as we walked to her car, but the silence between us was no longer heavy. It was something else, something lighter. As we drove away, I glanced at Marina, her profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. For all the pain we'd endured, there was a strength in her now that hadn't been there before. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of something new. 5 years later, the coastal breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers, ruffling the hem of my sundress as I stepped onto the terrace. Below, the ocean stretched endlessly, its rhythmic waves a soothing backdrop to the laughter of children, playing in the garden. It had taken 5 years, but life had finally settled into something that felt not just bearable, but beautiful. Marina arrived a moment later, balancing a tray with 2 glasses of iced tea and a bowl of fresh strawberries. She placed it on the table between us and flopped into the chair across from me, her face lit with the same energy that had once been hidden beneath layers of pain. "How do you always manage to find houses with views like this?" she teased, gesturing to the sparkling horizon. I laughed, leaning back into my chair. It's a talent. Or maybe the universe finally decided to cut me a break. Her eyes twinkled with humor. But we both knew the truth. The peace we'd found wasn't something the universe had handed to us. It was something we'd fought for. Ethan's name rarely came up anymore, but his shadow still lingered in the corners of my life, a faint echo of the chaos he'd once brought. After our confrontation, he had tried to piece his life back together. He moved to a nearby city to stay close to the kids, but our interactions were strictly logistical now. School events, holidays, the occasional email about schedules. His relationship with Marina had, unsurprisingly, disintegrated completely. She'd cut ties with him after the confrontation, refusing to entertain his apologies or his half-hearted attempts to salvage what they'd had. The last I'd heard, Ethan was living alone in a small apartment, struggling to rebuild relationships with people who no longer trusted him. I'd stopped feeling angry at him a long time ago, but the pity I occasionally felt was tinged with a hard-earned indifference. Marina's transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. After leaving Ethan, she threw herself into her art, something she'd always loved but had set aside during their relationship. Now, her vibrant, evocative paintings were displayed in galleries across the state. She'd also found love again. Not the consuming, all-or-nothing kind she'd once thought was the only kind worth having, but a steady, nurturing partnership that complemented her independence. Her boyfriend, Alex, was a gentle, introspective writer who adored her for exactly who she was, and their relationship was a testament to how far she'd come. For me, life was a balancing act, but one I'd learned to navigate with grace. The divorce had been messy and painful, but in its wake I'd discovered parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. I went back to school, earning a degree in counseling, a career born out of my own journey through trauma and healing. Now, I worked with women navigating their own storms, helping them find their way back to themselves. My children had been my anchor through it all. They were older now, their personalities blossoming in ways that filled me with pride and wonder. We'd built a new home together, not just a physical house, but a sense of safety and belonging that had once seemed impossible. The reunion. Every few months, Marina and I made it a point to meet, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for weekends like this one. Our friendship had become one of the greatest surprises of my life, a bond forged in the fire of shared pain and tempered by years of shared triumphs. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked now, her tone casual, but her eyes searching. "Not in the way I used to," I admitted. "He's more of a lesson now than a person, a reminder of what I don't want in my life. What about you?" Marina smiled, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "Same. I'm grateful in a strange way. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have met you, and I wouldn't have found the life I have now." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Here's to surviving him, and thriving despite him." We clinked our glasses, the sun dipping lower as the sky blazed with hues of orange and pink. For all the heartbreak Ethan had brought into our lives, he had also been the catalyst for something neither of us could have predicted. A friendship that had become a lifeline, a journey that had led us both to lives we could finally call our own. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and indigo, our conversation shifted to lighter topics: the children's antics, Marina's upcoming art exhibition, and my plans for expanding the counseling practice I'd recently opened. But even as we laughed and sipped our drinks, there was a shared undercurrent of reflection. 5 years ago, neither of us could have imagined sitting here side by side, on the other side of betrayal and heartbreak. The path had been long and uneven, but it had brought us to a place of strength and clarity neither of us had thought possible. The kids. The sound of laughter from the garden below pulled my attention. My two children, Emily and Jake, were playing a makeshift game of tag with Marina's niece, Lily, who had accompanied her on this trip. Emily, now 12, had grown into a spirited, empathetic preteen with a knack for calling out injustice, traits that had been sharpened by the tumultuous years following the divorce. Jake, at 8, was her opposite in many ways. Quieter, introspective, but with a fierce determination when it came to the things he loved. Marina's niece, Lily, was a bubbly 6-year-old who had brought light into her life after Marina reconnected with her estranged sister. Watching them together always reminded me of how much Marina's world had expanded since we first met. "They're growing up so fast," Marina said softly, following my gaze. "They are," I agreed, "and they're stronger than I gave them credit for. I used to worry the divorce would leave them broken, but I think it's made them more resilient." Marina smiled. "They've got you to thank for that. You've given them a safe place to land." Her words touched something deep within me. I'd spent so long doubting myself as a parent, wondering if I was doing enough. Hearing Marina say that felt like a validation I hadn't known I needed. A future unfolding later that evening, after the children had been tucked into bed and the house was quiet. Marina and I found ourselves on the couch, sipping wine and reminiscing. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Marina asked, her voice contemplative. I considered her question. "Sometimes, but I've learned to focus more on the present. I spent so many years planning, trying to control every outcome, and it didn't stop everything from falling apart. Now I'm learning to let life happen." Marina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that. For so long, I thought my happiness depended on someone else. Now, I know it's something I have to build for myself." I smiled. "And you've done a damn good job of it," she laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You too. I mean, look at us. We're unrecognizable from who we were 5 years ago." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of the past a distant echo rather than a looming shadow. A letter. Before Marina left the next morning, she handed me a small envelope. "I've been meaning to give this to you," she said, her tone tinged with something I couldn't quite place, reluctance perhaps, or closure. I opened it after she'd driven away, sitting at the kitchen table as the morning light streamed in. Inside was a letter from Ethan, dated 6 months after our confrontation. The handwriting was familiar, the words carefully chosen but raw with regret. "I don't expect forgiveness," he had written. "I just want you to know that losing both of you was the wake-up call I needed. I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand why I did what I did, and while I still don't have all the answers, I know this. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better, even if no one ever sees it." I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, my emotions a complex mix of empathy, sorrow, and detachment. For the first time, I realized I didn't hate Ethan anymore. I didn't love him either. What I felt was something quieter, something that finally allowed me to let go. Moving forward, that evening, as I stood on the terrace watching the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but it was mine, and as I looked out at the horizon, I felt the weight of the past finally lift, leaving me with a simple truth. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives are the ones we never planned for. The days that followed felt like a soft unfolding, a gentle exhale after years of holding my breath. I put the letter from Ethan on the top shelf of my closet, hidden away in a drawer of old keepsakes, no longer a burden, but a relic of the past. The future felt lighter now, clearer, yet full of unexpected promise. New beginnings. The counseling practice I had started years ago had grown steadily, my reputation slowly taking root in the community. I had built it from the ground up, with every session, every conversation, and every breakthrough serving as a piece of my own healing puzzle. It was a small but fulfilling practice, and I had recently begun offering group therapy sessions for women, offering a safe space for them to share their experiences and reclaim their power. The work I did now felt like an extension of everything I had fought for myself and for others. Every client who walked through my door carried a piece of my past, fragments of stories I had lived through, stories of loss, betrayal, rediscovery. I didn't see their pain as something foreign anymore. It had become part of me. The most profound change, though, was in my relationship with the kids. Emily and Jake were thriving, stronger, more self-assured, each finding their own ways of expressing their feelings, and far more capable of navigating the world on their own terms than I had ever anticipated. Jake had started writing poetry, his quiet, thoughtful nature finding solace in words, while Emily had joined the school debate team, her sharp mind and fiery spirit finding new outlets. They were flourishing, and I knew that much of it was due to the stability we'd found together. A visit from Marina's success as an artist had only continued to grow. Her exhibitions were now sold-out events, her work a reflection of the strength and vulnerability she had carried with her through the years. She had become someone I admired deeply, not just for her talent, but for the way she had reinvented herself, carving out a space for her joy and independence. One afternoon, Marina arrived at my house for a visit, her eyes alight with excitement. "I've been thinking," she said, as she set her bag down by the door. "I want to do something big, something that will leave a lasting impact. I've been offered a space for a solo exhibition in New York, but I don't know. I think it's time I take that leap." I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the same hesitation that had once kept her chained to a life she no longer wanted. But now, that hesitation was only a temporary shadow. Marina had learned to embrace uncertainty, to trust herself enough to step into it. "You should do it," I said, smiling. "This is your moment, Marina. You've worked so hard to get here. And you're ready?" She paused, her hand resting on the back of a chair as she took a deep breath. "I'm afraid, you know. What if it all falls apart? What if I'm just not good enough?" "Then you'll try again," I said, softly. "You'll keep going because that's who you are now. The woman who doesn't give up, who keeps moving forward no matter what." She nodded, her eyes moist with a mixture of gratitude and excitement. "You make it sound so easy. But you're right. I am ready. I just needed someone to tell me that." Later that evening, after Marina had left to start preparations for her big move to New York, I sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel a pang of regret or nostalgia when I thought of Ethan. There was a quiet peace within me now, a sense that the chapters I had lived through were complete, and the ones yet to be written would be mine to shape. Unexpected growth. Not long after Marina's departure, I received an invitation to give a keynote speech at a women's empowerment conference. I was taken aback at first. This was a step I hadn't planned for. But as the days passed, the excitement of the opportunity grew within me. I was ready for this. It wasn't just about my practice anymore. It was about sharing my story, our story, and helping other women see that they, too, could heal, could grow, could find their voices. I spent weeks preparing, writing, and rewriting until the day arrived. The conference was held in a large, airy venue, buzzing with anticipation. As I stood before the crowd, looking out at the sea of faces, some anxious, some hopeful, some uncertain, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. This was my moment, a culmination of everything I had learned in the years since I had stood at the precipice of my own brokenness. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady, I was a woman on the edge of everything, betrayed, uncertain, afraid. But today I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has learned to embrace the beauty of uncertainty, the power of resilience, and the strength that comes from owning your story. As the days bled into months, my life began to take on a rhythm that felt steady, almost like a melody I had once forgotten how to play. The past no longer had the same grip on me. It was like an old song playing softly in the background. Still present, but no longer dictating the tempo of my days. I had learned to find joy in the silence between the notes. A visit to Marina one crisp autumn afternoon, I received a message from Marina inviting me to visit her in New York. The invitation felt like a soft echo from our past, a reminder of how far we had come, both individually and together. The idea of seeing her, now so firmly established in her own life, filled me with anticipation. I flew out a week later, stepping into the vibrant city with a sense of wonder. New York had always been a place of possibility, and now it felt like a place of fulfillment. Marina met me at the airport, her arms open in greeting, and I couldn't help but smile at the woman standing before me. So confident, so radiant, so different from the woman I had first met years ago. "You look incredible," I said, my voice catching in the excitement of the moment. Marina laughed, her eyes twinkling. "You, my dear, have become even more beautiful than I remember." We spent the next few days exploring the city together, just the two of us, walking through Central Park, visiting galleries, and reminiscing about our shared past. There was an ease to our conversations now, no more secrets between us, no more pain. What we shared was the pure connection of two women who had fought to find themselves and each other again. Marina's art had taken on a new depth, reflecting both her personal journey and the raw emotions she had learned to channel into her work. She took me to her latest exhibition, her eyes gleaming with pride as she showed me each piece. "You were right," she said, her voice low and filled with gratitude. It was about letting go, letting the story tell itself, rather than forcing it into something I thought it should be. I nodded, moved by the beauty of her evolution. "You've done that, Marina. You've really done it." Ethan's shadow. Although the days in New York were filled with laughter and light, there were still moments when the shadow of Ethan lingered. I had thought the wounds were closed, but sometimes they reopened, not with the force of the past, but with the quiet ache of what could have been. One evening, after a long day of exploring the city, Marina and I sat on her apartment balcony, the skyline stretching before us. She had been quiet for a while, staring out at the view. "I haven't seen Ethan since he left," she said suddenly, her voice tight. "I mean, we've exchanged a few words, but it's nothing like it used to be. There's this space between us now, and I'm not sure how to bridge it." Her words were like a mirror to my own feelings. I had not seen Ethan either, but there were moments when his absence felt more profound than his presence ever had. I had built a life without him, one that was mine, and yet there were times when the old wounds would stir. "I don't think you need to bridge it," I said softly. "Not unless you truly want to. The space between you and him is not a problem to fix. It's just a part of the story now." Marina nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I wonder if he ever realized what he lost." I turned to her, my gaze steady. "He might have. But that's not for us to know, Marina. What matters is what we've built for ourselves." We fell into silence, the hum of the city below filling the air, and for a moment I thought of Ethan, of the man he had been and the man he had become. And I realized, with a strange sense of finality, that the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how far we had come from those days of betrayal, of grief, and of uncertainty. The future beckons. As I returned to my life, my work, and my children, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about understanding it, accepting it, and moving forward without the weight of what had happened keeping me anchored in place. The conference had been a turning point, and now, in this new chapter, I found that the words I had spoken to that crowd were not just for them, they were for me as well. I had claimed my future, and in doing so, I had made peace with my past. Marina, too, had stepped into her future with grace, her art now not just a means of expression, but a vehicle for healing. Her exhibitions had gained international acclaim, and she had even begun to mentor young artists, guiding them through their own creative journeys. Our friendship had deepened, our bond solidified not just by the trials we had shared, but by the strength we had each found in the face of those trials. We had not just survived, we had thrived. And in that thriving, we had discovered something beautiful, the ability to create new stories, stories that were ours.